Welcome to the Hyperadobe homestead.
Round 2.
Guys, a lot of you had questions on a recent video we put out about how to do Hyperadobe.
Yeah, we took everything we learned over the last 4 years, put it into one video. We kind of made it for our followers and other people doing earthbags, and somehow a bunch more people saw it that didn't know anything about earthbags.
Yeah.
And had lots and lots of questions.
So many questions that we have compiled a list and we're going to do our best to answer them.
Now, just a quick note, this video is definitely going to be different than the last Hyperadobe video. We're just going to try to answer as many questions as we can, as quickly as we can.
Because there's a storm coming and we need to get out.
Rapid fire. Ready?
Okay. Let's go.
By far, the most asked question was, can we do this in a wet or tropical climate, and can we do this in a cold climate? So we'll address both individually. Oh no, are you okay? So we'll talk about wet environments first. People assume that because we're in the desert that we don't have rain.
We have monsoons, as you can maybe see, coming in really soon.
Yeah.
So we do have like really short bursts of a whole lot of rain.
Small part of the year, right? It's not like it's ongoing.
Right.
So some tropical climates, yeah, if it's raining all the time, there's a few things you want to do. First, you want to probably put some sort of temporary cover over the walls while you're building.
Yeah, or you could even build a self-supporting roof to where like you're building your earth bags up to your roof.
Yeah.
That way everything's protected and you have some protection too.
Yeah, because what you don't want to happen is you don't want to oversaturate the bags. Now with Super Adobe, it can be a little more dangerous because those bags will hold water, whereas the Hyper Adobe bags, they're not. The water will just kind of drain out, and if you're using the right mix, it should almost make it harder if there's a lot of rain, but it will affect the dry time, which is like a whole other thing, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of pros and cons. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. It is possible. And also, like, when you finish, you want to make sure you have a really good roof with big eaves and good waterproofing on the outside so that moisture doesn't become a problem inside over time.
With any earth bag building, the most important things are the feet and the hat. You know, the boots and hat. So you got to have a really great foundation and you got to have a really great roof.
And so that segues pretty well into the cold aspect as well. Good boot, good hat, lots of insulation, because that is where you're going to lose that heat that you're trying to keep in. Now, is earthbag the best choice for like a super cold climate? Maybe not. The whole problem with a lot of traditional building is you're bringing in all this material that has been sourced from all over the world, and so all these huge ecological costs of moving that stuff.
If you're in the Pacific Northwest, like there's trees and stuff that can be milled there. Like grab a piece of property with some trees and
mill it yourself.
Yeah. That's what I would do. If I was in a different climate, I would just be looking for things that you can build with in your environment.
Yeah, that's the best way to approach natural building for sure.
Okay, next question.
Lots of people asked about earthquakes and stability with this type of building.
Now, there has not been a lot of testing, virtually none, on Hyperadobe.
True.
As far as like a seismic test. You know, with Cal Earth, they're building with Super Adobe and they have the barbed wire for the tensile strength.
People asking, I live, in an earthquake heavy zone. I would definitely go Super Adobe with barbed wire. And people ask, well, why can't we just add barbed wire to the Hyper Adobe? We just don't know. We don't have any information, no research. I don't think, like, this bag is so stretchy, I don't think it would hold in the bag the same way.
Yeah, I feel like there are some things, like if you're worried about tornadoes or earthquakes, you could like put more cleats in this.
You could use rebar to stabilize, although we go back and forth on whether that's a good idea. Anyway, long story short, if you live in an earthquake zone, definitely look into Super Adobe. I would stay away from Hyper Adobe, at least for now, until we know more. To go along with that, tornadoes, strong winds, I will say that the walls themselves are very sturdy.
If you can imagine, our shed has about 80 tons of material in those walls.
It's a 200 square foot building.
Yeah, and this house so far has more than that. So it's about 20 tons per course. And
30-ish courses.
Yeah.
600 tons of material. The walls aren't going anywhere from wind. It's just not going to happen. Now, your weak point is going to be your roof.
Obviously,
100%.
yes.
Yeah, so that is all going to depend on how you tie it in, and we talked about using those straps to use the weight of the bags to help mitigate some of that. But yeah, in general, I wouldn't be super worried about winds with these type of bags, unless maybe you had a really long straight wall that you hadn't buttressed very well and it was just catching the brunt of that. But again, circles are good. The wind goes around them. All that stuff.
Buttresses are great.
Yeah, all that stuff's important to the design. It all works.
Yeah. Another question that we got asked a lot was about permitting. So how in the world are you getting a permit for this?
Yeah, and listen, we know that this is an uphill battle in a lot of places, and we're hoping by sharing this information that this kind of gets on the radar of more people who will then help enact that change so that more local governments are going to accept these things. Now, that's not to say it's not impossible. This house we're building right behind us, it is permitted. We're in Cochise County, Arizona. They have this thing called the owner-builder opt-out that lets us opt out of inspections and build alternatively. It doesn't mean that we're opting out of building the code. We still have to do things the right way, but we do get to experiment with these alternative building methods.
Yeah, that's really why we're here, honestly. We moved to Cochise County because of the owner-builder opt-out. I know there are other counties that allow you to do the same thing, so you'll just have to check with your county and see if something like this is available.
You got to do that research. Now, another way that you can play around with this, though, is that you can try to build something that's small enough that it doesn't need to be permitted. So our solar shed, like we said, a little under 200 square feet, because 200 square feet is that cutoff for getting a permit. And so it allowed us to experiment without having to go through that red tape. So that's another option to think about. We focused in the last video on how to build with Hyperadobe, and one thing we didn't really include was utilities. And so lots of people were like, well, how do you do plumbing and electrical in 16-inch dirt walls? Great question.
Okay, for us, what we did was we brought up our foundation, and all of our plumbing is under our foundation work. Before we even did any bag work, all of our plumbing is in place.
Yeah, and in this house in particular, we are also taking advantage of framing certain walls where we know those pipes are coming up out of the ground, so we can still hide them and not have to come through an earthbag wall, because that would be very complicated.
Yeah, it's one of the things that we like about building this way is you aren't tied to only earth bags. Like, we are going to be able to install a lot of framed walls that separate bedrooms and bathrooms, and that allows us to like have a place to run electric wires.
Now, I will say too, in our solar shed, we didn't take advantage of any of that. We took variable Romex and we literally cable stapled it to the earthbag walls.
And covered it.
And then we plastered over it, and they're just in the wall.
It's fine.
I mean, it was good for an experiment. For like a house, I don't think I would do that.
With the house, the most important thing for us is like we want to be able to get to that wiring just in case we need to, and we don't want to have to like rip a bunch of plaster off our walls.
Now, also when you're building, we talked about cleats in the last video. You can have a cleat with an electrical box attached to it, and that way you can run your wire kind of between the crease of the bags into that outlet and out to the next one. You can daisy chain them together. And so for this house, we'll be going up into the ceiling for as much of our electric as we can, and then dropping down either into the frame walls or right along the face to like a light switch.
Also, we're going to be doing the same thing for our water lines. So this is going to be an experiment. We're going to be running our water lines up into our ceiling and dropping down where we need to.
That's true. We haven't built a building with an earthbag building with water lines. Yeah, you can put a piece of like conduit in the wall so that you can pull your wire or your pipe or your gas line or whatever you want to later, but it does require pre-planning.
Yeah, which we're not the best at.
Yeah, the one downside of earthbag building is that you really do have to plan ahead. You can make some adjustments on the fly, but in terms of your utilities, you really kind of need to know beforehand.
And one thing that you could do if you're like, I just don't know if I have enough conduit in here for whatever you want to run, just stick a few extra pieces of conduit in there. It's easy to cover up.
Oh, yeah.
And as long as you know where it is, you can like break that plaster at any point and, you know, add more wiring.
Also, if you really need to, you can punch a hole through the wall.
Yeah,
not great.
It's not the best, but it can be done.
Yeah. Okay, quick lightning round on all your other questions about Hyperadobe. Ready?
Set.
Go. Many people saw that we were putting things on the wall while we were laying the next bag. There was dirt, there was rocks. You want to talk about that?
Sure, I would love to talk about it because it's my favorite thing to do. Guys, with Hyperadobe, you have two mesh bags. And because we're using dirt and clay, it will interlock with each other because it's a mesh bag. It has little open holes. And so we always wet down the previous layer before we lay our next layer. But what I think works even better is if we add a little bit of dirt or rocks just to give it that little extra grip.
Yeah, so it's kind of acting like
A mortar.
A mortar, or a little bit like barbed wire. It's not quite the same, but the idea is that having these like vertical pieces that get put in there will keep it even more from potentially slipping off.
Yeah, this is as a little like tension lock there, you know?
Here's why I don't like it, and we argue about this all the time.
All the time.
Because I'm usually the one with the bucket up on the wall, and when we're lower layers, it's fine. It's kind of a pain to step on lumps and things of dirt and rocks, but as you get up higher and you're trying to balance, it really becomes a little bit dangerous, just a little bit.
I think everything's fine.
So we kind of disagree. I don't think we need it. She likes to do it. We do it when we can.
This is a house. It is a permanent structure. I want all the security that we can have.
Yeah.
So sunny.
I don't understand where that
I don't know. I
thunder
saw
just came
lightning
from.
over there. There was lightning over there. Lightning round.
Oh, right. Yeah. All right. The next one, cleats. Besides using cleats to install windows and door frames, you can put them anywhere you want that you're going to mount anything to the wall.
Especially if you plan on mounting like cabinets to a wall.
TV, mini splits.
So many things. Yeah. Just plan it out. Add some extra. It's not going to hurt anything. If you have too many, you can just cover it.
Yeah. And like we talked about how we're putting framed walls in this, we're definitely going to be putting cleats in where we know our frame walls are going to be, so we can attach that frame wall to the earth bag wall and be screwing into wood and not into the bags, because that's always, you never know when it's going to grab.
Another important question was insulation.
Well, we talked a lot about how it's different. It's you know, thermal mass and thermal mass transfer, but some people said, well, is there a way to make this more insulative? There maybe. Lava rocks.
I would love to do some experiment of lava rock being mixed into our AB mix or whatever soil we're putting in these bags, just to see if it adds that little bit of insulative.
Yeah, because scoria is very insulative. But if you only put that rock in the bag and then try to tamp it, it's not going to be super stable. If someone were to accidentally slice that bag, they could like fall out. So you would want to mix it with dirt, but theoretically that could be a way if you have lava rock available. We don't. We looked, trust me, because we thought it sounded cool. But that could be a way to help make these walls a little bit more insulative. Okay, rebar, we talked about earlier.
Okay, we go back and forth on rebar too. I think it's a terrible idea in an earth bag building in Hyperadobe because it's breaking that compression of your bag.
Yeah.
And you know, how much rebar are you talking? Are you going to be putting a bunch in here like every 16 inches? Like, I just feel like it's not the best thing, and after building several buildings, I feel like we just do not need it.
It depends though. There are some times when you're going to be like attaching to another thing, or where you might need that rebar for it to lock into. I don't know. We've heard it both ways, so
we're not experts. That's just our opinion.
Lots of people who see us working hard are like, why don't you mechanize this? Why don't you build automate it, build some sort of contraption to make this go faster? I'm like, well, that would kind of defeat the purpose of natural building, but also it's just complicated. Like, you could get some sort of conveyor belt, but that conveyor belt would literally have to go to a new spot every single load.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be crazy. I don't know how you would even, especially like this building where there's so many different layers to it, getting to those different walls, especially.
That was a really big lightning.
Especially to get up higher, could be a problem.
Okay, it's really coming this way, so you need to hurry up. Also, another reason that we don't want to automate this process is there's something really special about filling this dirt with your hands. Every one of us is touching every bit of this material that goes into the wall, that goes into the plaster, every part of it.
And also the journey is a big part of building this way with our family together. Yeah. We're spending time with the people we love, doing things that we love. And so, you know, if we're bringing all these machines in and it's noisy and it smells like gas and like we've got all these crazy contraptions and it changes the dynamic of it, you know, and if that's what you want to do, that's fine, but like that's not what we want to do. Lots of people talking about building underground with earth bags. What do you think about that?
I go back and forth. I think it can be done as long as it is done really, really well. Yeah. So it's kind of like a retaining wall. If you're building underground, you don't want to just go straight vertical.
Step out.
It's a little dangerous, especially once you use backfill and have all that pressure against those bags. If you could just step it out a little bit as you come up, I think it's a great idea. But also, it's super important. This is so loud. Also, it's super important to have a vapor barrier at that point. So you need to have a really big circle in order to like carry that vapor barrier all around your building.
Yeah, straight walls probably not a great idea. Anytime you're building something underground, there are just so many steps and precautions you need to take, and all those are going to apply to this. You can't just throw earth bags in the ground and hope it'll be okay. I don't know. I don't think it's a great idea personally. Like, I know there are benefits to being underground, temperature regulation, all that stuff, but I just don't know if it's worth the risk.
I think it's also dependent on your soil. For us here, our soil is crazy sandy, 12 feet down.
Yeah.
So that is a danger in itself. Like, you know, when we were doing our septic, our walls just kept caving in. So
Yeah.
if you're 12 feet underground and your walls are caving in, that's not a great idea.
Nope. So one thing I realized we didn't really talk about in the last video was insurance.
It can be done. I know a couple people that have had their Hyperadobe houses insured, but it is difficult process for sure.
And like here, we talked about this owner builder opt-out thing. When we opt out of inspections, we're also opting out of the certificate of occupancy. So that means an insurance company's like, I can't do anything with that. A bank is usually like, can't do anything with that. Like, so those are trade-offs that, you know, we're consciously making so that we can build this way. We can be way less in debt doing it ourselves. But it does mean that we need to overbuild, we need to do it right. We have to think about all that stuff kind of far into the future. How long does it take?
As long as it takes.
I know we said it was really hard and it takes a long time. We didn't get into specifics. So for reference, our family of 6 can lay, 100, 150 linear feet of earth bag in like a 3 to 4 hour afternoon. That's about as long as we kind of go at it. We don't want to spend 8 hours a day earth bagging.
Yeah, a lot of people are like, how much time are you doing? It's not that long. 3
we have
to 4
other things to do.
Guys.
We have school. We have, you know, we're making videos. Like, there's other things to do besides build earth bags. If you had a whole crew on it doing 8 hours a day, you could build a lot faster.
For reference, our solar shed took us 11 months, and it was the very first build. We didn't know what we were doing.
Sure.
If we were to build that again, I think we could build that in 6 months.
Well, yeah, and the bags were way less than that. A lot of that was learning how to do roofs and interior plaster and electrical and building the solar array and all that stuff that went along with it. But the bags themselves, like for reference, I think we're planning on about a year for us to lay the earth bags for this 2,500 square foot house.
I'm hoping it's less than that.
I mean, me too, but I'm being realistic. It'll probably take us about a year.
I'm being realistic and saying it's not going to take us a year.
I love your optimism.
As if hope was a pill or a bottle or a phone that could hold me and heal all my sorrow, but still nothing upholds me and frees my tomorrow like you. Ooh. With you I see the morning always comes. With you I hear the story told by love.
Okay, so we had to relocate.
Yep, there was way too much lightning and too much rain, so we're inside.
We're inside now, where it's safe. In our earthbag building.
Yeah.
So the last item on the lightning round is cost.
Yep. And I don't even I don't even know where to begin because it totally depends on your style, your aesthetic, and how you want to finish the inside.
Right, so I mean, we talked a little bit about the cost of the actual bags. They're very cheap, all things considered. The cost of soil should be relatively inexpensive. If you're adding cement into the mix, that does push the cost up a little bit. But the thing to remember is that, like, building a traditional stick frame house, like when I was doing research for that other video, they said to set aside $100,000 for framing alone.
Yeah, I can't even imagine.
That's just framing. That doesn't include the insulation or the drywall or any of that. And so in terms of like building the walls, it's crazy cheap. It's just dirt and bags, right? Yeah. But once you get into finishing it with your doors and your windows and your roof and your floor, all that stuff's going to depend on how much money you want to spend on it and how much you want to save. So we can't really speak to the total cost of a building, but we can tell you that, you know, you're basically just buying those bags and getting dirt to build your walls.
I mean, that's pretty dirt cheap. Did you like that?
I liked it. That was good. We love all the different kinds of natural building, but I do think it's important to understand that natural building doesn't always mean 100% natural. Usually there is some sort of pro or con or compromise involved. But the thing is, you gotta step back and you gotta start from your baseline. So I'm gonna pull this clip from this other video real fast just to give you a baseline of where to start with. The construction industry accounts for nearly 40% of worldwide energy usage, 23% of air pollution, 50% of climatic change, 40% of drinking water pollution, and 50% of landfill waste. That's just what it takes to build the buildings. The stuff that we're putting in the buildings, also not great.
The paint that we're putting on walls is full of VOCs, which can cause cancer and birth defects. The fire retardants in furniture and textiles have PBDEs, which can cause tumors and thyroid issues. Formaldehyde is still used in particle boards and plywood and can cause respiratory problems.
A lot of this is finding that balance between those stats that we just shared of how bad traditional building is and finding a way to do it so much more natural. But that doesn't always mean 100%, because if you're making it and it's falling apart, well, that's not doing anybody any good either.
Right. There's trade-offs between being natural and being maintenance-free. We've seen a lot of people put clay plaster on the outside of their house, but they're coming back every 2 or 3 years and having to redo it. And that's just not something that we personally would like to do.
Right. And so I think by sharing this method of Hyperadobe, like what we're trying to do is, like we said, we're trying to make this as accessible to as many people as possible. And so if you're kind of going into it with, oh, well, you can build this cheaper, but then you're going to have to spend the rest of your life like taking care of it. And not every house needs maintenance, but taking care of it in a way that is really big and potentially expensive and time consuming, that's going to turn a lot of people off, and that's not what we want. We don't want to gatekeep any of this stuff, right? Like, we want to make sure that we know that this is something that anybody can do. And yes, that does mean some of those trade-offs are maybe we add some cement into the walls to stabilize it, to make it safer for those people who didn't necessarily do all the research on what mix goes in the wall. Yes, maybe we do wrap it in some plastic because that makes it safer when you're building for huge rains and making sure that it stays stabilized over time. Those are trade-offs. You don't have to make those trade-offs. You can use jute or hemp. I don't think it's a great idea, and there's a reason that the last 30 or 40 years we sort of standardized on using the plastic around the bags for safety and longevity and all those things.
I know a lot of people were concerned about microplastics, but with the Hyperadobe bags that we use, they are UV treated. They can last 4 to 5 years here in the desert without being covered, and even longer on the east coast of the country because, they don't have the UV rays that we have here.
Yeah, and the thing to remember is microplastics happen when the plastic is exposed to the sun and the UV breaks it down. If these are already UV treated, and then once they go underground and they get plastered over, they're not going to flake off. They're not going to turn into microplastics. And the last thing I'll say about plastic is that I don't think we really explain the actual volume of plastic being used, especially with Hyperadobe bags. It is paper thin. It is meshed together. An entire roll, which is 1,640 linear feet, it weighs 40 pounds. 40 pounds of plastic. And if you start to think about all the different things that you might have in your house, your appliances, your tools, your toys, your electronics, you have way more, much denser plastic just sitting around in your house. And that doesn't even get into what your house was built with. And that doesn't even get into the amount of plastic that we throw away every single year. It's hundreds of pounds per person, at least here in the US. So remember, we talked about our house is going to be 600 tons of wall with maybe 100, 200 pounds of plastic total. And it's not going to degrade. It's going to stay in that wall and it's going to help keep everything nice and snug and tight for the rest of its life. That's a trade-off that we're willing to make. And if you don't think that works, that's totally fine. But just understand it has been heavily considered and like we thought about it, we promise. And finally, we would like to address a really weird comment that kept popping up that mentioned how you always stood behind me and how I was a terrible person for making you do that.
Guys, he's not making me do anything. So here's what happens. I have really broad shoulders. I feel more comfortable standing right behind him. I'm next to him. I'm not going like, guys, everything's fine. Don't make it weird.
We really like each other. Yeah, it's cool. It's just we're just trying to fit on the screen here.
Yeah. You see these shoulders?
Okay, are we done?
Yeah, we're done. Guys, thanks for watching this Hyperadobe question. Sorry the lightning made us get in here, but you know what? Got it done, babe. We got it done.
We did get it done.
I'm still standing behind you 100% of the way.
Oh, that was a good callback. Hey, so listen, we are building that Hyperadobe roundhouse and we're putting out videos every week about it. So if you're not subscribed and you're like, this Hyperadobe thing seemed kind of cool, but I don't know, they seem kind of crazy, but I don't know, maybe just subscribe and just watch a few videos and then you can decide if you want to hang out with us more and watch us build our house.
Hey, thanks for hanging out with us.
Yeah.
Stand behind your man.
Or in front of him. Whatever works for you.
Whatever you want to do. Because
cool.
it's totally up to you. You get to decide what happens in your life. Guys, have a great day.
We'll talk to you later.